So today we are going to do a similar video to what we did with our Western leather sheaths, where we're just going over the improvements that have happened over the last year or so, culminating in these price rises. Now what we're working with today is a prototype windfall, and that gives you an idea of how recent some of these Kydex changes are, you know, and how they've ended up leading to way better sheaths. So let's start with the simple stuff, which is hardware. So right here, we've got all of these eyelets along here. Now these are locally available in Nepal. These are like a 2-piece eyelet. So one piece goes up and then that goes over a washer and then it gets pinned over the washer. Now these are cheap, they're locally available, but they're pretty thin, which we're not a huge fan of. And they're much easier to deform because of the, 2-part method. One can slide and then it gets a little bit of looseness to it. Like you can see, this one has a tiny little bit of spin in it here. And yeah, it's just a little bit janky, Lots of these that are out there working hard and living full lives, but we think that our Kydex sheath work is at a high enough level that we kind of want our hardware to reflect that and look as professional as, we think the work is. So what we've done is we've gone across to these 1-piece eyelets. Now these are way thicker, they're way sturdier, they're more what you would just usually think of when you think of a Kydex eyelet. And as you can see, they give a lot more of a clean look, and just looking a lot more professional. So yeah, tougher, neater. They're also less reflective, which is important to a lot of people. So that's the eyelets. Next up is we've got hardware. So you can see here, these are just like machine screws with nylox on them. And, functionally, these have actually been awesome. Just need a spanner on one side, you need a screwdriver on the other side. Because they have this nylon component in there, they don't rattle free, and they've been great. But one issue with them is length. So these have a pretty limited length. They also stand quite proud of the sheath. They're also shiny, which, as we said before, a lot of people want non-reflective hardware. And you also need 2 different tools. You need a flathead and you need a wrench. So if you want to change this in the field, swap over to a different hardware loop setup, you need more stuff, which is just less than ideal. Anyway, so what we've gone and done is we moved ahead to more of a, again, just like classic Kydex style Chicago screw. So these are way more flush, these are way neater. These use like rubber washers, which helps with preload, and also it adds a bit of distance between the Kydex components, so you don't get as much of like a hard clacking sound if it's moving. And yeah, these are basically an improvement in every way. They're way easier to use. We also have been putting these together with a thread retention compound, just to give another barrier of defense against these things rattling free. And yeah, these were a little bit difficult to import, but now we've got a bunch of them and we are very, very happy to have them. Okay, so next up, we've got the horizontal base loop. So what you can see is that this has 2 holes here, which is currently being used. And it's got these 4 holes here, which are for the vertical drop leg loop to go into. But there isn't actually any other ways to put this horizontal base loop onto the sheath. Like if you want to go straight vertical, you can put this down, you can bolt that down, but it's a lot of Kydex, if you want that. And you'll also note that this doesn't have a little triangle tab on here, which you might have seen on social media. So in comparison, our newer ones have holes underneath here, here and here, which means that this can get bolted down on the side for a really compact, vertical carry setup. You can also bolt it together with this portion here left undone as more of like a loose, like Mora Sheath style belt clip. It's not the best belt clip, you know, you can go and buy an ulti-clip for that, but it is a capability that is here in our regular sheaths now, which is cool, especially for smaller blades. But yeah, the big change is this 60-degree loop. So this 60-degree hole here, we were initially looking at 45, but the holes ended up being very close together, which is bad for durability, which is something we're always really worried about. Kydex can be brittle in cold temperatures, so we really wanted to make sure that there was no stress raises or additional weakness being added in. And yeah, we put them closer together until eventually they were one hole. Yeah, what we found is that these 60-degree loops, they're actually a lot of the times more useful than a vertical loop for some of these larger blades. That's because if you've got a longer and larger blade, if it's going properly vertical, the tip can actually interfere with your knee and it can really get in the way of your mobility sideways. And so having just a little bit of tilt on it means that the length gets reduced as it starts to take up a bit more horizontal space. And it also remains a little bit easier to draw because it does have a tiny little bit of an angle to it naturally. Now, you can still do vertical, particularly on shorter blades, but we found that this is actually a lot of the times more useful than a strict vertical carry. And what you can do is you can take these 60-degree loops and you can bolt them at different points along the edge of the eyelets to get, you know, quite a fine control over the angle, because it's not a straight edge. Maybe it's a little lower, maybe it's a little higher, but then you can use your drop leg or your dangler to adjust that. So speaking of drop legs and danglers, here we are. Now this is what our old drop leg and dangler looks like. The drop leg has not changed much. I think we've gone a little bit flatter maybe in here. If not, we'll edit this out of the audio. But you can see there's quite a bit of change up here in the dangler. So not too long ago, our dangler was a single piece of Kydex. And it was held in place by a single rivet through the center of the D-ring like that. Now that doesn't have a lot of redundancy, you know, like this is a reasonably strong rivet, but if it does come loose, then the whole knife just comes through, you know. You don't want to be in a situation where you're relying on only one thing to fail for it to come apart. Another issue with this is that it's a fixed loop. So if you want to use this, you got to take your belt off, put it on, and then put your whole belt through again. So it takes time. If you've got other stuff on your belt, it's really annoying. So there were a lot of issues with this dangler design. What we've gone to instead is what you see here. So this is a nylon webbing 4-snap dangler. This can be snapped and unsnapped straight onto your belt, so you don't have to take anything off. And in our testing, this is shown to be really absolutely rock solid. We were initially shipping these with fully stitched, fixed nylon webbing and 4-snaps. But as time went by, we realized that these are basically rock solid anyway. And because they're a bit more flexible, these can be a little bit more comfortable to wear, and they can have a bit more twist to them, which is sometimes a nice thing to have in a dangler. You know, a little bit less of a really tight Kydex on metal type join like we were dealing with previously. And yeah, so you can see that this is right now at the top of the drop leg, but if you so desire, you can put it through the horizontal base loop as well. You can sit that at 60, you can do it at 90, you know, and you can end up with a really great dangler setup that isn't purely vertical. Because as we previously mentioned, blades this size don't necessarily like being held properly vertically. And so this gives you a way to work around that. So the final thing that has changed, probably the most obvious, is that this has an open spine at the back. Now, we've been using open spines for a really long time, and we like them. They are really easy to draw and store from. Like, it's a little different, you know. People are used to putting the tip in the back like this, and then what they can do is sometimes overshoot it like that instead of just going in the back like that. But yeah, they're easy to draw and store from. If you've got a really long blade, because there isn't so much distance that's actually needed to get drawn from, it's way easier. So on like 24-inch Chitlanges and stuff, if you have an open spine Kydex sheath, you only need to pull it like 12 inches instead of it being 24 inches of draw. You know, it's a whole affair, and you need quite a bit of flexibility and technique to do that. But this sheath style is not without its problems. The first thing is it lets water in, right? This is just a big, open, gaping thing waiting for rain to sit into. We've got drainage holes at the bottom, but it's still less than ideal having it in there in the first place. Next thing is stiffness, right? So this is reasonably stiff down here where the eyelets are, right? But up here, it's just like spaghetti, right? And that's because it's not joining across the top. It doesn't have that rigidity that comes with being one single piece. The final thing is that because it doesn't have the rigidity here, it's very hard to do retention around the bolster, right? See that that's not particularly tight there. And it's really good to have retention around the bolster because that's where you can really get that positive snap, click in, click out kind of feeling to it. You can get lots and lots of retention without having pressure on the blade. Now, in an open spine sheath, you are basically reliant on the sides of the Kydex pressing in against the blade like that and stopping it from falling out. That can lead to the blade getting scratched up, but it also makes the blade's retention in the sheath really dependent on if it's like a little rusty or a little oily. You know, you can imagine that if it's freshly oiled, it's going to slide in and out really easy. If it's like been working quite hard for, you know, a few days and it's got heaps of gunk and stuff on it, you go to put it in and, you know, there's a lot of resistance, and then maybe it doesn't go the whole way in. It sits out this far. And you jump around and it falls out. To solve this, we moved over to closed spine Kydex. Now, this lets a lot less water in, which is awesome. As you can see, when you take the blade out, it follows the curvature of the spine a lot more like a usual DAP would, which in some ways aids with retention because the blade has to follow in a specific angle rather than just going out in a straight line. And so for Kukris, that can often help. Once it's out though, you can see that this is way more rigid now, which is super important, particularly on wide and long sheaths. You know, when the blade is not in here, sometimes, especially if you've got this bolted down at near the bolster, it can feel really flappy. And so this is a lot more of a solid feeling, which is awesome. And then, yeah, because there's more rigidity along the spine here, we can add retention to the bolster, get a lot more of that positive click-clack, locked in place kind of feeling there. And we can also take pressure off the sides of the blade. It makes these knives feel better. It makes them scratch up the sides of the knife less. And in general, it's a pretty easy win all around. Why didn't we do this sooner? It's pretty hard to do with Kukris, right? So because these are recurved, we have to design them kind of like we would our DAP. We have to leave extra space in the recurve so that the blade can pull through. And it's kind of difficult to know how much pressure to put in these spots. Some of these blades are really, really heavily curved, which makes it quite challenging as well. And so this is something we've been working on over the last year, just starting with easier blades, longer, straighter, skinnier, and then moving to more heavily curved and blades with really big bellies, which are actually the blades that benefit the most in terms of rigidity. The only real downside to closed spine is, like I said, if you want to draw a blade really quickly, open spine is better. And if you do want that, you can just message us and we will make that happen. Like, we can do that as a custom request still. But overall, we think that's a pretty niche application compared to, you know, all of the benefits that most people will be getting from just having this closed spine. Okie dokes. So that is Kydex done. You've had a look at this lovely knife here, which is great. And my cat has also been quiet the entire time. Let's see if we can go for a little adventure and find her. Ah, here she is. Here she is. Hello. And you get a little POV cat time here. Hey? That's your congratulations for watching the whole video. Well done, guys. So stay tuned and we'll have some more updates for you. We probably won't have any more Bon in future videos though, so make the most of this now.